Hi, and welcome back to Chats with Nadia and Ro about team coaching. Thanks for joining us today. So, our last post included a conversation around accountability, and we posted it on to LinkedIn. And we've had a couple of comments come back from that post, which we thought we'd unpack a bit today. And we thought we'd go a bit with the flow. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we get into that, as usual, please like, subscribe, comment on the posts. It always helps us if we know that people are listening. And if you've got questions, then obviously that's the starting point for a conversation for us to have with you listening in the room. So, Nadia, we were just chatting about the comments that came in from LinkedIn. So, do you want to just say a bit more about those comments?
Yeah, I think last time we spoke about accountability, like it seems such a buzzword, right? Like we've spoken about this. It seems to pop up quite a bit in coaching team leaders, that want accountability from their team or sort of wanting to empower them, but not sure quite how, that sort of controlling versus empowerment dilemma. But yeah, accountability sort of came up, and I'm really grateful for, whoever is following our posts and our videos, perhaps that you picked up on something that I'd like to unpack a bit more today, which is accountability is relational, not just operational. So there's always this little bit of tension, right? Also in the direct and empowerment, in the operational versus relational. There's always, some dynamic in that. Accountability is not just saying, look, we've got this schedule and that's how it needs to be done. And, like accountability is just ticking off some tick boxes of things that need to get done. Accountability is a lot more than that. So I was wondering if we could dive into that relational aspect of accountability a little bit more, and then maybe also, pick your brain of picking up that sort of tagline of accountability is relational, not just operational. What does that bring up for you, Ro?
Yeah, so in the corner of my eye, I've got a little note, a hashtag on in my book, say be human. And I went to a book launch last week, and it's about BS of organizational behavior. So he used this tagline because ultimately we like to think that everything is mechanistic and that we can control things. And essentially, his book unpacks a lot of the history of how we got to where we're at. It's a fascinating book. I'm really enjoying reading it. The tagline, though, as you can imagine, be human, really, really resonated because we talk about it's about being human beings, not human doings. And so I really like that concept of accountability is relational, not operational, because what that means to me is that it encompasses things like trust. It encompasses things like connection with your team colleagues. It encompasses things like shared space, shared deliverables, shared outcomes, shared outputs. So all of those things kind of come up for me when we talk about being relational rather than operational. So yeah, I think that was a great spot. Whoever it was who wrote that comment on the LinkedIn post was a great spot.
Yeah, fantastic. And thanks for sharing that book, and we will share the title later. So what I'm picking up is, and I think we sort of keep circling back to this, and it was also some of the comments that came in, sort of, people that are in that space of this systems thinking. So what I'm picking up from you, like history or the human aspect of things, and what got us where we are at the moment. There's a lot of sort of, systemic relational dynamics in that. And I think that's why we're drawn to team coaching. I think it's also sometimes the reason why people not completely understand what team coaching is,
Mm.
because whenever we talk to leaders, I always have huge respect. And there's so much pressure, so much stuff needs to be done. We don't need to tell them, what is all the stuff that needs to be done. We don't really need to tell them, how accountability works. It's really just getting to this insight, really, that team coaching is about sort of coaching the space in between the individuals, not so much the individuals, because team leaders know their team. They know who's good at what. They know what needs to get done. They know their schedule. They know their planning. So it's really then a matter of, right, so what are those things or those historic or those systemic dynamics that play up here in the team? Can we put a little bit of light on that. And that's often where team leaders can use a little bit of help.
Yeah, yeah. So, how might we help team leaders then to understand that systemic relationship in the team? Because that to me sounds like it's a really important facet of accountability.
Yeah, exactly. And just funny, I was reading another LinkedIn post earlier around team coaching and, how it's all about being present. So really, team coaching is all about having the presence. And I think we spoke about this also. It's presence and maybe also permission to actually look into these things. Where do we actually get stuck? Because sometimes they're a little bit taboo as well, right? Like these things sometimes go a bit deeper in terms of, what are certain values? How, these unwritten rules, how do things get done here in this organization? And some of it might just be bias. Some of it, might just not be that conscious all the time. But how can we sort of, in a respectful way, have sometimes the difficult conversations that need to be had in order to push through that sort of stuckness or that inertness of something that is wanting to actually gain accountability, right? What is it that wants to get that accountability that it deserves so that the team delivers on the metrics that they're supposed to do?
Yeah. There are a number of things that come up for me there when you're talking about that. Deliver on the metrics that the team are supposed to do. And this is so, I know it was James Healy, by the way, who was the writer of the book. And one of the things that he talks about in the book, as I've said, is the history of how we've ended up where we have in organizations, why we've got this mechanical engineering kind of view of organizations. And so just thinking about the sort of the metrics, the KPIs that the team has to deliver, if we think about how those are created in the organizations, there's a system behind that, isn't there? And sometimes they're not necessarily well connected and well thought out. And sometimes they're in contradiction of each other as well. So, if we think about being a member of a team, and I'm thinking back to when I was a member of a corporate team. I'm obviously members of different teams now, but not corporate teams. I'm just thinking about some of the ridiculous KPIs that we had and thinking about how a child of 4 could actually work out that the KPIs were nonsense. And they didn't connect together. And so you might have a KPI over here, which was in direct contradiction of a KPI over here, and you were expected to deliver on both of them. And it's like, well, how can those two things be true at the same time? So you constantly worked with that cognitive dissonance and holding that in your brain and in your being, it kind of can be very frustrating. And one of the reasons why people feel frustrated in teams because they're being asked or told to do things that they know inherently don't make sense. So when we look at things like accountability, we think of it from an individualist point of view, but actually accountability is created collectively. And often it's not because people are willingly negligent or deviant around that accountability. It's because they're grappling with this cognitive dissonance in the back of their mind and trying to reconcile that with what they're actually doing on a day-to-day basis. And then we think about identity as well. If I'm being asked to do something which I inherently know makes no sense, then think about that, how it affects me and how I feel about my value and identity within the team and within the organization. So for me, we often look at accountability through a single perspective and lens, when in fact that lens is much wider, and it's all part of what I talk about a lot in my post, pathologizing individuals, pathologizing teams for things that they can't possibly control, for things that they can't possibly be accountable for. So, and those kind of conversations I think are important for teams to have. What's the elephant in the room? That is the elephant in the room. So that would be kind of my wider take on what you said there and what that brought up for me.
Oh, that resonates so much, Rose. Thanks for bringing that up. And what I'm taking from that is, shifting that lens from individual accountability to collective accountability. And I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm a system and control engineer. So what resonated with me is kind of like just from that sort of controlling, like controlling the system with input and output and feedback to actually this multivariable control. But it's still, like for me, the journey that I'm on from a mechanical engineer into team coach is really that it's acknowledging that it's not, like someone outside of the system trying to control the system or do it to the system. It's really about how do we allow the system to almost like control themselves.
Yeah,
And wrote books about self-organizing, but it really hit me now that that's really what is necessary. And it's just a beautiful way of coming to that realization. But that sounds almost a little bit abstract also, because you said, like how can we actually help team leaders do that? And so I think that's a really valid point. So whilst these are great metaphors, it's sort of because it's not mainstream, it's not how we're sort of approaching, business and teams in this collective responsibility. And so I think that's a little bit of a mind shift that we can help team leaders with by coming to this realization. And how do we shift it to this collective responsibility? And really, why the reason why, why do you want collective accountability or collective accountability? It's really because that's ultimately giving you different perspectives. So when we say, this is a really complex world or a VUCA environment, and we need all of these people to work together, we need all of these different perspectives. But, like how? And it's a real challenge.
yeah,
So
yeah. So as you were talking there, I was thinking about one of the things that I sort of came up with on the fly when I was doing a talk recently was I created it's not really a tool, but it's a way of exploring complex metaphorical conversations, and I called it N cubed because it's, what are you noticing? Can you name it? And what are you going to nudge? Because it's accepting that you can't necessarily control the system, but you might be able to nudge it in different ways. So, understanding, so let's name what's actually going on around accountability. What's our stuff? What's the system stuff? What's your stuff? And what's my stuff? So you're kind of naming those different parts, and then being able to notice as well what's going on around that, and then working out, okay, what do we collectively want to do? What's one small thing that we could do as a team that would help us, come to terms with this, or help us move forward, or whatever it might be. And I'm not being prescriptive here because you don't know what's going to come up. The context determines what comes up in the conversation. But just having a way of having that conversation and bringing it out into the open so that you don't, as a team leader, blame people for things that they can't possibly control or have little control over. And collectively, you get a better understanding of what's going on so that you can do something about it. That kind of would be my take on how we might be able to support the team leader in unpacking that complexity.
yeah, great. So we touched upon many different things. So to round that up, how can we summarize sort of some of the elements? And I think really around, like how do we go from singular individual accountability to collective accountability? But ultimately, what is it what team coaching does? How does it actually help team leaders to discern sort of the individual from the collective team, sort of the space in between individuals, and how to gain accountability from that space in between the individuals? How would you summarize? What is your main insight from this discussion?
So uh, 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 it's a big topic. So
It is.
first of all, I would say just that
And
let's
I'm putting you on the spot there. Sorry.
it's a huge topic. And, also, I don't want us to go in as team coaches fixing stuff. I want us to go in helping, enabling, supporting, guiding, challenging the team to come up with its own perspective on what's happening. So I would summarize it, I guess, by saying it's helping them see the spaces in between and understanding the connection they have with the wider system. The team itself is a system, so that's one thing, and it's also understanding that space between them and the wider system. So it's that in between thing that we're trying to tease out when we're talking about accountability. I would say that's how I would summarize the big topic that we've just had a very brief conversation on.
I love it. Thank you for that, Ro.
Awesome. And also, just to say to people, it is James Healy. I will put the link to his awesome book. Definitely recommend you have a read of it. It's just mind blowing in terms of the topics he covers in a very short space in a book. But it's definitely whetted my appetite. And if you're interested in behavioral science, definitely have a read of it. So again, thanks for joining Nadia and myself today on Chats with Nadia and Ro. Please like, subscribe, put comments in the comment section below, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next conversation. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.